The animosity existing between the Tennessee troops in my command and the Tennessee troops in the fort was such that I could not be responsible for the fate of the garrison.
Memphis, Tennessee, September 3rd, 1868. Yesterday afternoon, I left this city in company with General Forrest for Fort Pillow, 65 miles above here. Arriving at Randolph, we spent the night there, and this morning made our way up to the old fort, now almost lost in fact, but existing upon the pages of the history of the rebellion. The old works are now overgrown with hickory brush and young peach trees that have sprung up from the fruit consumed by the garrison, yet all the old lines, though very much washed, are still plainly visible. The fortifications the rebels built in 1861 to defend the land approaches were upon a very expansive scale and would have held quite a large army. After the occupation of the place by the Union forces in 1862, they contracted the line of works upon the highest part of the bluff and enclosed within them the northwest angle formed by the river and Coal Creek, overhanging almost the creek, while a bench of the bluff, some 40 foot wide, lies along the side next to the river. From the very singular formation of the hills and ridges surrounding, a hostile force could have easily crept up within 150 yards, and in some places within 30 yards of the line of earthworks, and this is precisely what the rebels did when they captured the place. As we walked up the hill, the general's face assumed a very serious cast, and when we had reached the high point upon which had stood the Union flagstaff, and which overlooks the whole field, he said,
"We are now upon the spot where I am represented to have assumed the role of a ferocious butcher and murdered in cold blood a whole garrison of Union troops, thereby supplying material for illustrations for Harper's Weekly."
Climbing up in the grass-grown ridge that was once a breastwork, we sat down alone. I to write a description of the ground, the general to refresh his memory upon the movements of his troops. While I wrote, I could not but glance occasionally and think, this is who is called the hero of the Fort Pillow massacre, now looking over the scene of his bloody work. But even in his darkest moods I could not associate him in my mind with any of the horrid butchers of humanity that history describes to us. When I finished writing, I looked up and the general said,
"Before I describe to you the particulars of the fight of April 12, 1864, I must give you a little preface to the story. While at Jackson and other points in West Tennessee, I learned from what I still believe to have been reliable sources that the Tennessee troops under Major Bradford at Fort Pillow had pillaged the whole country, and under the pretext of looking for rebel arms, had insulted women, abused old men, and in several instances had committed the most brutal outrages upon highly respectable women. Many of these persons so abused, robbed, and insulted were near relatives and friends of the Tennessee troops under my command. These men positively refused to leave Tennessee unless I would first take and destroy Fort Pillow. In addition to this, a delegation of citizens from Jackson waited upon me and made the same request. Therefore, with the people seizing the opportunity and my troops refusing to move, I had no alternative but to attack the place, although I did not consider it of enough importance to waste the life of one of my men upon, for I was not so situated that I could hold it with my small force. This preface explains to you why I came here and made the fight which has given me a notoriety which, being unmerited, is very unpleasant to me. When I ordered the troops forward, only about 1,400 in number from Brownsville, I was at Jackson, about 76 miles east of here. I rode from there here in about 26 hours and arrived upon the field about 9 o'clock in the morning. You see that line of old works running along the top of the ridge to the south of us, the right hand disappearing into the ravine next to the river. Well, behind that my men were sheltered somewhat, but my sharpshooters were on those little knolls between here and there, and also along the ridge running along our front from the south up to those trees and intersecting Coal Creek. From this point I advanced my lines through the hollows until I had driven the enemy within their main works, and was within 60 yards at the south side and 30 yards of their works at the northeast corner over there, near the bank of Coal Creek. Just to the south here, where you see those barred spots, stood some hospital buildings in which some of their wounded were laid. These buildings the enemy fired to prevent my men from taking shelter behind them, and I think they burned up some of their own dead and wounded. That was the only fire made during the fight that day, and if anybody was burned, it was done then. Having my men this near, and my sharpshooters in such position that they could pick off the gunners within the fort, and knowing that I could take it by storm, I desired to save all the lives I could, and therefore sent in a flag of truce, demanding the unconditional surrender of the garrison, at the same time assuring them that they would be treated as prisoners of war. My men were then so close to the works, here on the southwestern corner, that the flag of truce was halted before it passed my line, and the conference took place just to the left of my troops. The officers from the fort at first refused to surrender, and when this reply was brought to me, I sent another demand, in which I stated that the animosity existing between the Tennessee troops in my command and the Tennessee troops in the fort was such that I could not be responsible for the fate of the garrison. To this demand, Major Bradford returned an answer asking for an hour to consult with the officers of the gunboat New Era. I saw at once that this was a ruse to gain time, for I had learned only a few minutes before that a force had been landed below at Fulton, which could cross the country, get on the ridge in my rear, and leave me no line of retreat. Added to this, the smoke of boats above and below was seen approaching, and I therefore sent back an answer that I would give them 20 minutes, that I did not ask the surrender of the gunboat, but only of the fort. During this time, the boat coming up the river was approaching, and we could plainly see that she was loaded with troops and artillery, but a shot across her bows sent her on up the river. And now I want you to observe where the flagstaff stood here in the fort. The pole was about 60 feet in height, and stood so that the flag was plainly visible to those under the bluff there, next to the river, while they could not see any person or know what was going on up here in the fort. I also want you to see the road that leads up to the fort, from the river, from that ravine to the south there. It was along that road that the 2 companies of my troops came, who charged under the bluff after the fight again began. I waited until the 20 minutes had expired, and seeing no evidence of a surrender, I ordered a charge. My men at once charged into the ditch, and, by a hand-to-hand fight, drove the enemy, still fighting, over the bluff. When the charge was sounded, a portion of my men went down there under the bluff and charged those who jumped down the bank. As soon as we were in the works, I turned one of their 6 pieces of artillery upon the gunboats, which I saw was preparing to give us a volley, my shot striking her on the wheelhouse. While this firing was going on, my men under the bluff, seeing the flag still waving, kept up the fight, and it was not until the flag was cut down that they knew I had possession of the fort. The whole of the charge and capture did not occupy more than 20 minutes. This was the taking, and now for the massacre. There were with me many citizens who had been wronged, and I think, without waiting for the surrender of the men who had wronged them and their families, they shot them down. When I found out that they were doing this, understand this was during the 20 minutes of the engagement and not after the capture, I ordered it stopped, and was compelled to shoot one of my own men who did not obey me promptly. The whole force in the garrison numbered in all 557 troops, white and colored, when the fight began. After the fight, we sent 70 men who were wounded on the gunboats, and then sent to Demopolis, Mississippi, for exchange 7 officers and 215 men, making 292 men in all who survived the capture. But in addition to this, 44 or 45 Negroes were taken by my young men and returned to their masters, making a total of 100 Negroes who were left, or a total of 340 of all the troops surviving. The total number of colored troops in the garrison at first was 262. Some of these, as well as some of the whites, escaped from the works and into the woods and across Coal Creek. No man was killed after the capture by my order, and any killing that was done was without my knowledge.
This is the story of the capture of Fort Pillow as told me by the principal actor upon the battlefield itself. On the way down, he said he could not understand why the fight there had been called a massacre, that its result was only natural in war, and he thought the public should so regard it.
If you enjoyed today's video and would like to see more content like this, be sure to take a shot at the like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell to stay up to date with all the latest BirdDogg content. And if you'd like to support the channel, for a limited time there's exclusive Civil War Diaries merchandise available in the video link below.